So before we actually start coding our Express application, I would like to explain a little bit what an API is. An API also stands for Application Programming Interface. It is actually a set of rules and protocols that allow different software applications to communicate and interact with each other. It defines the methods and data formats that applications can use to request and exchange information. So let's look at this small example. Here we have a taxi application, and here we have two APIs, Google Map API and PayPal API. Google Map API may offer services like calculating distance traveled from one point to the other, and PayPal may offer services like payment and so on. So let's say a client wants to pay a bill after having benefited from taxi services. So the client accessing this taxi app will need to pay a certain amount of money, which will be calculated based on the distance covered. The distance covered will be obtained by calling the Google Map API, which calculates the distance covered between point A and point B and sends that distance to the taxi API. Then the amount of money to be paid by the client will be calculated based on that distance. The payment may be performed by calling the PayPal API, which in turn either decreases a certain amount of money from the user's account or sends an error if the amount in the user's account is not enough to the taxi application. That's a simple explanation. That's a simple use case of how the API functions. So let's look a little bit deeper into an API. Here we have a simplified structure of an API. Begin by the endpoints. The endpoints are the different routes available on a particular API. Routes are the entry points to an API. They are composed of a request and a response object, which carry along data in a specific format. It can be a JSON format or plain text format. The request may be made using a particular URL and face this first middleware here, which is the CORS middleware. The CORS middleware makes sure that the request is made from a permitted user. That is, the request is made, for example, from an application that was recognized by this API. If everything is okay, the request will be allowed to move to the next step, or if it is not okay, a response will be sent automatically to the client making the request, saying that there's a problem at this level. So if it is okay at this level, we are going to move to the caching services. The cache service stores frequently used information or frequently used data. So if the request was once made and was stored in the cache, then the cache will automatically respond with the information that was stored previously. That is, if the request made is identical to the request that was made earlier, then the cache service will respond automatically without allowing the request to move forward to the logic found in the API. So if the request is not found in a cache service, we are going to move to some other middlewares. If we are requesting resources that are protected from a route that is protected with a middleware, for example here the authentication middleware, then we will need to be authenticated. We shall need a particular information or data that will be verified or checked here to make sure that the client making the request is authenticated. If not, then the request will be blocked or will be cancelled, and a response will be sent back just as the CORS middleware did or the cache middleware did. But in this case, the response will be a negative response, asking the user to authenticate. After which we may come to the role middleware. The role middleware here makes sure that the resources that are being accessed are actually accessed by someone who is having the permission or the priority level required to access that information. Let's say, for example, we have 3 priority levels: guest, administrator, and simple user. The administrator having the highest priority level, simple user the second, and guest the lowest priority level. So if, for example, this route is protected, and is only permitted for administrators, then a guest calling this route will be denied access because the priority level is not sufficient. But if the priority level is sufficient, the request may then move to the controller. The controller here is the beginning of our business logic. Here we have various controllers for various data processing or various items. For example, here we have the user controller and the document controller. Let's say this API is a document management API. And then here we have some routes moving to the controller which do not pass through authentication, because obviously before moving to the authentication level, we need, for example, to register and then log in before then going to authenticate. So some routes will not be protected, while some others will be protected. So in the controller, we may have some logic which actually provides the services requested. And these services are provided based on some particular logic. First of all, we may use models in order to make sure that we handle data sent through the requests correctly, and we send data correctly through the response, as we pass the information correctly as required by the client. And then the services down here may be used by the controller to actually access the resources requested by the client. Let me say, for example, here we have a database service which actually interacts with the database to perform CRUD operations, that is insert, delete, update, and so on. And then the controller in turn will just call the various methods needed to perform particular actions. Let me say, for example, during the registration, a user is inserted into the database. So this service will be called, this service will be requested, and the method that will be used in this service will be an insertion method, which may permit us to insert data into the database. Then after the user is registered, we may send a verification email to the user. So an email service here is needed to send a mail to the user email account. But you may see that there's some sort of a structure between the controller and the mailing service. That's because we may not always get an immediate response when we emit or when we try to send an email. It is a process that takes some time. So in order to not stop our API or to not stop our API server when calling this service, we may use a background job broker here. In this case, we are going to use a RabbitMQ, which actually takes in the action or the request from the controller and then stores it in a queue. The mailing service will then access the queue to actually perform the task requested by the controller. After which, when the task is done, an information may be sent back to the controller, which may then use it to perform some other operations. The same logic goes for all the other services. And the same way we use models to handle correctly information in the controller, these services may request also models here to actually manipulate information in the right way, or manipulate data in the right way. So that being said, I think we now have a basic understanding of what an API is. In the next video, we are actually going to start building our Express API.